There is an invisible problem plaguing America today. America's infrastructure is old, is old and is deteriorating. I'm here to prove today that America's infrastructure will be unprepared for supporting the future generations of Americans. When I refer to infrastructure, I mean the public facilities that aid us in our transportation, energy, communication, and water needs. In this process, I will prove 3 claims. 1, America's infrastructure is not sufficient as it is now. 2, changing conditions will create more problems for America's infrastructure in the future. And 3, despite the need for a greater attention to infrastructure, politicians are neglecting infrastructure development. My first claim is that America's infrastructure is not sufficient currently. I base this off of the fact that a lot of America's infrastructure is outdated. It is not designed for the loads they carry now. In his book, Too Big to Fall, Barry LePanther states that 1 in 4 of the nation's bridges are not designed to handle the loads they carry. This is backed by the American Society of Civil Engineers, or ASCE, which in their report found that 39% of America's 600,000 bridges are over 50 years old, yet most of these bridges were only designed for a 50-year lifespan. They also found that the average age of America's dams is 56 years old, and 17% of these dams are deemed high hazard potential. It is clear that the age of America's infrastructure is contributing to its insufficiency. My second claim is that changing conditions will create more problems for America's infrastructure. America will need to adapt to a world of globalization in the terms of global competition. In the past, America's power was always derived from its infrastructure. The Louisiana Purchase gave us more land to work with, the Transcontinental Railroad connected this nation's economy, and the New Deal created a stronger foundation for a booming national economy. Yet in recent times, America has fell behind countries such as Japan and France in terms of infrastructure, according to the Global Competitiveness Report 2017. Furthermore, America's infrastructure will need to account for the growing population's needs. The ACE estimates that by 2032, an additional 56 million people will connect to the sewage system. That's a 23% increase in demand. If this demand is not met, America will face a huge sewage problem. My third claim is that despite the need for a greater attention to infrastructure, politicians are neglecting infrastructure development. The economic benefits of repairing infrastructure now is there. For one, investing in infrastructure will reduce the ever-growing inefficiencies that are caused by road congestion. The ASCE found that $160 billion of gas were wasted in 2014 alone through traffic congestion. And this number has been increasing steadily each year, with $305 billion wasted in 2017. As Barry LePanther puts it, keeping up is much easier and less costly than catching up. He reports on a study done by Dutch engineers from the Pioneer Institute, which found that for the Longfellow Bridge in Massachusetts, which is now over 100 years old, an annual investment of just 1% of the capital cost would have saved $80 million compared to the cost of repairing it to good condition now. Despite the economic benefits, infrastructure is still being neglected by politicians because they are in the business of being reelected and gaining reputation. Raising money for infrastructure is difficult because of this, because politicians avoid raising taxes at all costs. Ashley Halsey from the Washington Post reports that the federal and state gas taxes that fund the construction and expansion of highways have not been increased since they were bumped to 18.4 cents per gallon in 1993. And when considering inflation, this means that the gas tax has actually gone down. Furthermore, politicians have more incentives to build new roads and highways than maintaining existing ones. This is seen in the easily observable phenomenon of ribbon-cutting politics, which is when politicians would rather spend on new flashy public works than maintenance and minor repair, as it would gain them more reputation and visibility in the public eye. Not only that, they are actually incentivized by the federal government, as 90% of the cost of building new roads and bridges is covered by the federal government. The Congressional Budget Office found that the 90% federal contribution provides substantial incentive for states to expand their participation independent of their actual transportation needs. This means that politicians are wasting money building new roads and bridges that we do not need instead of repairing the ones that we do need. I hope that I've proven today that because politicians are ignoring an aging infrastructure, that America's infrastructure will be unprepared for supporting the future generations of America. Thank you.
All right, we're full of engineers tonight. Infrastructure. Proposition's clear, the contents are laid out okay. The presentation seems like it's reasonably well organized, although sometimes it feels like some of the minor claims on a couple of the points take us off on diversionary issues, so you always want to remember how they connect to the main proposition. The information on the first point that talks about the bridges not being able to carry, having the carrying capacity, that they are over 50 years old, and that that there are potential problems there. That's all good information. Although at the end of the speech, you're arguing that we're replacing those things and that that's a bad thing. So it's a little confusing as to why it's better to repair the bridges that we have than build new bridges. There's an argument somewhere that says that the ones that we're building we don't need. That's a presupposition, and you need to develop that argument because from what it sounded to me like is that they are building new bridges, and if we're replacing the old bridges with the new bridges, that seems like a good thing. If they're not being replaced and they're being put someplace where we don't need them, that's something that you need to prove, and I thought that was a little bit thin on that particular argument. The example that we had of historical infrastructure investment is pretty good. I do still see the same kind of argument same kind of issue that I saw with the earlier speech, and that is that there's not an estimate of what the total cost would be and how deficient we are in what we are spending on those sorts of things. You do make the same argument about the gas tax, for instance, that was made by the previous speaker, and I'm going to make the same comment also, that we should have some information about what that gas tax raises and what it gets spent on. If it's not being spent in an appropriate way, which is kind of what your last point is talking about. It says that we're spending it on these ribbon cutting things that are more politically popular than fixing the roads. That's a very generic argument, and I've already mentioned to you why I think that's a little bit problematic. By the way, the previous argument right before that had to do with road construction and traffic congestion, and I got to be honest with you, anytime there's road construction, there is traffic congestion. So the idea that traffic congestion is going to be fixed by construction seems to me to be antithetical. There's got to be some explanation about how in the long run it is better for us, because every time there's road construction, there is going to be more traffic congestion. So I appreciate that there's a long-term goal here that needs to be developed a bit more. Presentation is just, you need to look at us. There's just a lot of reading here. There's not much attempt to connect with the audience, and if the data was a little bit more compelling, maybe it wouldn't be that problematic. But it really feels like it's kind of at the surface, and there's more to this argument. This is an important argument. This is something that I think people recognize is problematic. The question is, what are we making our choices on? I think there are probably good examples that you can point to. You mentioned a bridge in Massachusetts, I think, or was that the previous speech? I can't remember now. Who mentioned the bridge in Massachusetts? That was you. Okay, that sort of thing, and how we were short-sighted in the way we spent our money on that, and that we instead we're building new bridges. I think there are probably lots of projects you could point to and say, here's an example of a project that somebody decided that we ought to have, whereas the money would have been spent on better, more effectively on something else, and it wouldn't be that hard to look at and find. Although the comparison to other countries maybe undermines that. It's a little conflicting on a couple of points. I don't want to go off there. Never mind, I'll stop right there.